The leaders of the world's two largest economies, Trump and Xi, the US and China. Together, those two countries represent 40% of global economic output. A trade war has been on for a year, which has sent shockwaves through the world's economy. Now the leaders have agreed to restart trade talks as Trump promises not to impose new tariffs on Chinese goods. Those talks came on the heels of a breakthrough for the European Union and the Latin American bloc known as Mercosur. The EU signed a trade deal with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay to slash billions in tariffs.
This is a historical moment. These negotiations have been 2 decades in the making.
The summit in Osaka has focused on international trade tensions, but for some there, the climate crisis was at the top of the agenda. The group have signed an agreement on climate change similar to the one signed at last year's summit in Argentina, again with the US refusing to join the effort. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the warming climate can no longer be ignored.
I believe in science, and the best available science that we have today was defined by the IPCC report, making clear that we should limit the growth of temperature to the end of the century to 1.5 degrees and defining a roadmap to reach that objective. And that requires a meaningful increase in ambition.
Only the US, which produces 15% of the world's greenhouse gases, actively opposes progress on that front.
Well, at Donald Trump's final press conference at the G20, he praised his relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping and was also upbeat about the ongoing trade spat between the U.S. and China.
We had a great meeting, and we will be continuing to negotiate. And I promised that for at least the time being, we're not going to be lifting tariffs on China. We won't be adding an additional, tremendous amount of, we have, I guess, $350 billion left, which could be taxed or could be tariffed. And we're not doing that. We're going to work with China on where we left off to see if we can make a deal.
Well, DW's Max Hoffman is covering the G20 summit, and he joins us now from Osaka. Hello to you, Max. So the U.S. president described his talks with Xi Jinping, China's president, as excellent. But did they even manage to settle any of their differences on trade?
They settled one issue that was probably going to send a sigh of relief through world markets, which is they're going to hold off slapping their mutual goods with further tariffs, something that Donald Trump, the U.S. president, threatened to do as early as or as late as last week, wanting to put tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods, and that would have really made a difference on world trade. So this seems to be off the table for now, which is the important word here, because I remember, Mariana, after the Buenos Aires G20 summit last year, we were exactly at this point, and then things started going downhill from there. So it really matters what kind of trade agreement they will reach, if they reach a trade agreement within the next weeks, because that's much more complicated than sitting down together here at the G20 summit, shaking hands and saying everything is excellent when you still have so many problems and details to solve.
Well, Max, another major development at the G20 was the announcement by the EU. They've reached a draft agreement of what's the biggest trade pact in the EU's history with the Mercosur group of Latin American countries. What's the significance of the timing of the announcement of this draft trade deal?
Yeah, there was, you couldn't make this up, really, because at the one hand, you have leaders struggling with bilateral agreements like China and the U.S., and on the other hand, you have the EU shining on the world trade stage, going up there and saying, it took us 20 years, but still we made it, and it shows that there is still room for this kind of compromise, for the multilateral framework, and it's unimaginable that this is just a coincidence. This was on purpose to send the message the EU is open for business, and our model is actually working, if you look at it, and the model that Donald Trump and the U.S. and all the other countries that are not in favor of the multilateral framework of hashing out these kind of compromises and deals are on the wrong track.
Well, Max, and despite various differences among the G20, they still managed to renew a commitment to tackle climate change, well, at least without Donald Trump. And they also were able to agree on a final communique. So do both of these things then qualify as a success, in your opinion?
Well, the climate issue might have been even more complicated than the trade issue, because as we understand, the United States demanded at the beginning that the whole topic of climate change be scrapped from the final communique, but there was strong opposition against that. And then there was fear that other countries like Brazil might not want to sign that part of the communique, because in Brazil you now have Jair Bolsonaro, who's often called the Trump of the tropics, and he said he was a big fan of Trump, so there seemed to be some danger there. But in the end, they managed to keep the 19 together, so 19 countries, except for the United States, to sign that paragraph of the communique, and that does qualify as a success, even though you don't have the second biggest polluter in the world when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, the United States, in that. And of course, that's not good for the planet as a whole, but if you look at the G20 and what could be expected from this meeting, it's a success. And I think, generically speaking, the same qualifies for trade. There was some compromise. They had to take out, for example, the protectionism part in the past, where they said protectionism is bad due to influence of the United States, but they still managed to have some common ground there and a communique itself, something that many doubted beforehand. So yes, keeping the status quo in these difficult times qualifies as success.
Well, Max, along with trade and climate change, there was another topic that was discussed. That's German Chancellor Angela Merkel's health. There has been a great deal of concern after she was seen having an episode of shaking 2 times. She did talk about that at a press conference. Let's have a quick listen.
I can tell you that firstly, I understand your question, but I have nothing special to tell you except that I am well and convinced that just as this reaction came about, it will also go away again.
All right, so the German Chancellor a bit cryptic there. Max, what do you make of her statement?
Well, I was there at the press conference, and you could tell that, she doesn't like that kind of questions. Nobody really does, but by signaling that she understood the question, she acknowledges that there was a problem. She's quite open about that, but she won't say if she knows why this appeared and why this disappeared again. All I can say from seeing her twice during these 2 days is that she appeared to be, as she always is, very calm, very collected. We did not see any shaking of any kind, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't really know what this means. For us, what's important is she doing her job here? Can we give a judgment on that? And yes, she definitely did do what is expected of a German chancellor at the G20 summit in Osaka.
All right, DW's Max Hoffman reporting for us from Osaka. We thank you very much.